Of all the destinations for the human race in the solar system, Mars to me is the most compelling. A planet with the tallest volcano in the solar system, the deepest canyon in the solar system, and a variety of other natural wonders that are frankly unique. I wish I could go to this place tomorrow. But the one thing that I find the most compelling and the most frightening is the fact that Mars, of all the planets in the solar system, may be the most likely to hold life. And by the way, we probably have already detected the presence of that life, in spite of what the majority of exobiologists might have to say about the subject. And if this life is similar to our own, and spread between the two planets over the millions of years by a process called panspermia, it is entirely possible that the evolutionary track taken by this microscopic life went in parallel to what exists here on Earth. And if that indeed is the case, then any disease on Mars might very well be compatible with the human species, and we might not have any defense against it. And these are not just the words of a paranoid madman. On the contrary, the US government just last month decided that NASA cannot be exclusively responsible for protecting this planet from a potential extraterrestrial disease. And the reason they cited is the fact that private companies like SpaceX are planning to go to Mars and do not fall under NASA jurisdiction. Therefore, NASA quarantine methods would not apply to them, and therefore the US government needs to step in to protect our population. But what solid proof do we have that this life even exists? I mean, according to the majority of exobiologists, Martian life, if it does exist, is tucked away in caves somewhere, away from the cold and away from the radiation. Nevertheless, Dr. Gilbert Levin, who carried out the only significant life detection experiment on Mars back in 1976, asserts along with his team that life was detected back then, and the evidence that's been uncovered since his discoveries seem to support this assertion. Now, even though I've covered this before, I'm going to cover it in greater detail this time, and in many cases I'll be quoting directly from Dr. Levin himself, so get ready for a very special episode of The Angry Astronaut. Now, instead of trying to explain the label release experiment myself, I'm just going to have Dr. Levin do it for you. He does a much better job. But if you could just give us a little bit more detail on what you were sending out to do rather in 1976, and what the results were.
Okay, let me try and describe the experiment very simply. It is not such a bold new experiment. It's just like most experiments. It's on the shoulders of other people. There is a test that has been used for more than 100 years by municipalities around the world to test the purity of their drinking water for contamination with microorganisms. It's very simple. They take a sample of the water to test, put it into a test tube of nutrients, and incubate it for 1 to 3 days. if during that time they see bubbles appear in the test tubes, that means that there are microorganisms present that are eating the nutrient and putting out bubbles, generally carbon dioxide. So I took that experiment and enhanced it a little bit by making it quicker and more sensitive by using carbon-14, which is radioactive and easily detected in the nutrients. I tagged the nutrients with carbon-14. And in addition, I added several other nutrients because I didn't know what Mars bugs, if there were any, might like. I used nutrients that were discovered in the Miller-Urey experiments that formed out of the primitive Earth atmosphere. So I felt if Mars had a similar origin to Earth, those were pretty good nutrients to use. So what we did was take the nutrient, 7 substances actually, and put them in the mission to Mars. When the spacecraft landed, it picked up a sample of the soil with that long arm that I'm sure everybody saw, and put samples in individual tubes where a drop of the radioactive nutrient was put on it. If there were microorganisms present, we should get radioactive gas out. And in both experiments, 2 Viking landers, 4,000 miles apart, that happened. Now, we were not content with the evidence that the municipalities take, just a positive response. We felt we needed controls as well. In other words, control experiments to assure that the positives were correct. So NASA suggested the controls to us to take a duplicate sample of any positive sample and heat it to 160 degrees, which they felt would kill any microorganisms, but not harm any oxidant chemicals that might have caused a false positive. Well, when we did that, the results were negative. So now we had the proof that we had wanted, that NASA said it would accept as evidence for life on Mars.
I see. And so also I believe, Dr. Levin, you also heated it to a lesser degree. Is that correct?
Yes. We went on and did ad hoc experiments, and we found that this microorganism was sensitive to 50 degrees centigrade, and that even when stored in the box in which it was stored after collection for 2 months, there was no response. They all died, or whatever was active ceased being active. That makes it extremely difficult to explain by chemical.
However, it has been since pointed out that sterilization procedures for spacecraft in 1976 were primitive compared to what we use today, and that these experiments might actually have been picking up Earth bacteria along for the ride. However, if the containers were heated, killing all bacteria, which the experiments confirmed, then where did the extra Earth bacteria come from when the experiments were repeated? It debunks the whole concept. Now, the one problem with the Viking experiments was the fact that they didn't pick up organic molecules. However, the instruments that they had in 1976 were not particularly sensitive, and the instruments that Curiosity had years later were far more sensitive and did detect organic molecules. Had Viking detected everything that it did in the label release experiment, plus organic molecules, we probably would have announced the discovery of life on Mars in 1976. But since then, exobiologists have become even more conservative. For example, we've detected an unusually large amount of methane in the Martian atmosphere that appears and disappears on a seasonal basis. Now, volcanism can explain the presence of methane, but there's nothing about volcanism that's seasonal. On top of that, we've detected unusually large amounts of oxygen in the Martian atmosphere, and we know that there's bacteria here on Earth that can consume perchlorates and produce oxygen as a byproduct. A perfectly good explanation as far as I'm concerned. And finally, Dr. Levin recently wrote a paper arguing that the non-stop bombardment of cosmic rays on the Martian atmosphere should have stripped away the extra oxygen atom from the CO2, leaving carbon monoxide, and yet the atmosphere is comprised of carbon dioxide, which is only possible, as far as we know, if something is producing the carbon dioxide, namely something alive. And yet, NASA's current mission to Mars is equipped with nothing designed to definitively prove or disprove the existence of life. Instead, it's designed to gather up promising samples and to send them back to Earth in about 10 years or so. Who knows, by that time Elon Musk may have humans on the red planet, becoming human guinea pigs. If he's wise, he might send Rhesus monkeys first. But regardless, this is NASA's plan, and it's a risky one at that, given the unpredictable nature of re-entry when you're sending back samples. And this is one of the reasons why I think the Lunar Gateway is so damned important. One of its primary missions is to intercept any materials coming from any other body in the solar system and to experiment on and quarantine these samples to ensure that they're going to be safe before they're returned to Earth. It's a perfect solution, assuming that this thing doesn't get defunded. If it does, then we are playing a game of serious Russian roulette. And this is why I believe that at the 11th hour, the White House has come up with a national plan for planetary protection, right before we have a change in administration. Because if it turns out that Martian life is as widespread as the Viking experiments indicate it might be, given that the two probes were separated by thousands of kilometers and all of their tests, none of which ever turned out a false positive on Earth, turned out to be positive on Mars, we may be facing a serious problem from this planet in the future, and we need to be ready. Otherwise, we could be facing a problem far more serious than we've faced in recent history. By the way, it is with a heavy heart that I must inform you that Dr. Patricia Stratt, who was Dr. Levin's colleague on the Viking expedition, somebody that I intended to interview as well, passed away back in October. And foolishly, I had intended to let a few months go by in between interviews about Martian life before I interviewed her, and lost the opportunity to interview a brilliant scientist and somebody who had a unique and bold insight into not just the possibility, but in my opinion, the certainty of life on Mars. So, Wherever you are, Dr. Strat, I am very sorry, and we appreciate the contribution that you have made to science and to our understanding of the red planet. All of that having been said, I find it very interesting that in the waning hours of the Trump administration, when this administration supposedly is exclusively focused on trying to get the election back or whatever it is that they're trying to do right now. Instead, they also came out with this recent initiative. And I'm trying to figure out who might have come up with this initiative in the first place. It's very brief, it's very preliminary, and it simply suggests that NASA not have exclusive purview over this problem. And yes, I think it may indeed be a problem, but rather that other departments, the CDC, Homeland Security, and others, be involved in any sort of materials returned from Mars. Mars is singled out, or from any place else in the solar system. And this is something that just seems somewhat suspicious to me. Makes me wonder whether or not the possibility or the probability of microbial life on Mars and the possibility that through the process of transpermeation, in other words, the two planets sharing life between each other over the past hundreds of millions of years through meteorites and other methods, that these two forms of life may have evolved side by side and therefore might be compatible. Now, if life evolved completely independently on Mars, a second Genesis, if you will, and was completely unimpacted by human life, or rather by Earth life, then the compatibility issue probably doesn't exist. However, that is by no means a guarantee that it wouldn't possibly be dangerous to humans. If it does evolve completely independently from us, then what form is it going to take? How deadly might it be? We can't know for certain because we're only familiar with life here on Earth. One thing we can be certain about is that whatever microbial life exists on Mars, it has to be incredibly resilient, capable of dealing with radiation, extreme cold, perchlorates, and by the way, there are bacteria called extremophiles here on Earth that can survive all of those things. As a matter of fact, because they can survive all of those things, some people have theorized that they might be from Mars in the first place, because such a thing would be an evolutionary oddity here on Earth. You wouldn't need to be able to survive a vacuum or extreme cold radiation, that sort of thing, to evolve here on this planet at any point in its history. So why does it exist? And why is it here? Well, there are a number of biologists who think that it evolved on Mars and managed eventually to find its way here. Regardless of whether that's the case or not, these extremophiles do not appear to be dangerous to human life, which is a very good thing. So, all of that having been said, I thought it would be a good idea to release a video about Martian life and the potential danger that it does represent, because Dr. Levin most fervently believes that it could represent a danger and that we need to experiment with this life on the moon or on the lunar gateway before we allow it anywhere near this planet. What I find especially sad is that it's entirely possible, of course, this is the case with Dr. Strat, but Dr. Levin may also pass away before his accomplishments are recognized by the scientific community. And to me, this is the greatest crime of all. And this makes me angrier than just about anything. And I am completely confident that once we take a serious look for life on Mars, as we did back in 1976, except with the far more advanced equipment that we have at our disposal these days, we are going to find that what Dr. Levin has believed all along is actually true. Let's just hope that we don't find out at the cost of millions of human lives. Time will tell. In any event, we are in a new year. We're already up to, I believe, close to 42,000 subscribers. We've just been shooting up like a rocket. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of that. If you want to continue to support this channel, you know what to do. It's all in the description. And I certainly appreciate everything that you folks can do to help me out. Obviously, I'll again mention Spaceship Mania and their Starship. It's all in the description, and you use the code ANGRY10 to get a 10% discount. Or, like as I've said many times before, it's not your obligation to pay my bills. So just throw me a like, throw me a subscribe, and I will be very, very grateful. So, until we actually make a serious effort to find life on the red planet, a serious effort to locate it before we send samples back to this planet and roll those dice, as we are foolhardy to do, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.